Good morning and hello, everyone. It is my honor to welcome you to this first day of the 2022 American Express Leadership Academy Global Alumni Summit. Pausing for applause that I know is happening now for those of you who are joining us today to engage in this dynamic leadership conversation. I also want to extend a special greeting to our American Express Leadership Academy Network. This annual gathering is an opportunity to bring together this global community of social sector leaders who participated in the leadership in our first hybrid summit, building on the success of our 2021 virtual summit. We're thrilled to have alumni delegates gathered in Washington, D.C., as well as alumni delegates connected online. I too am here in D.C. And excited to be here. Our daily leadership journey conversations are a way to highlight unique leadership stories while bringing the message of the summit to a larger audience. The theme for this year's summit is Forward Together, Leading, Listening, and Flourishing. Today, we'll focus on the topic of learning and of leading and listening as we engage in conversation. My name is Weston Pierre, and I'm the CEO of Partnership with Children, and a proud alumni of the American Express Leadership Academy, both in the 2015 New York cohort and as well at the Aspen 2.0 in 2019. I am from New York, and I am delighted to be joined by the leadership of two organizations that are truly the reason why we are all here. Madge Thomas is the president of the American Express Foundation and head of corporate social responsibility at American Express. American Express launched the Leadership Academy in 2008 and have engaged more than 5,000 leaders to date. With us also today is Bidjan Nashat, CEO of Atlas Corps. Atlas Corps, with the support from American Express, launched the Leadership Academy alumni community in 2014 and has implemented all 6 summits. But before we start our conversation, we're also listening to your comments and questions. So please send them in one of 2 ways. If you're joining us via the Summit platform, please type the question in the Q&A section in the chat box. And if you're joining us on social media, you can type the question in the comment section on YouTube or Facebook. And you can also use the hashtag AmexLeads. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll be sure to get to your questions throughout this talk today. So on that note, let's begin. Madge and Bidjan, thank you for joining us today. A unique characteristic that you both share is that you assumed the leadership of established organizations during extremely uncertain, tumultuous times, during a global pandemic, and in unique circumstances. You were joining remote teams with limited in-person interaction. And also, I just wanted to hear from you all about your journey. And so as a matter of introduction, I invite you both to share with us a little bit more about your background leading into your current role. So we'll start with you, Madge.
Sure. So prior to American Express, I was actually in the nonprofit sector. I was at UNICEF headquarters at the UN, and prior to that at Global Citizen, a large advocacy organization in New York. And then, as you can hear from my accent, I hail from Australia originally. So prior to my time in the States, about 7 years ago, I worked as a human rights lawyer in Australia, largely working with Indigenous communities. I also did some time at our State Department. So I'd started out in in the law. I went in and fed into advocacy, ended up in nonprofit and humanitarian affairs. But the thread towards the last part of my career was really, corporate and nonprofit partnerships and sort of trying to bring that corporate mentality into places like the UN, not always easy, but also vice versa, bringing that perspective of impact and storytelling and advocacy to the corporate sector, which sometimes isn't able to communicate purpose as much. So the opportunity to take on this role at American Express, a 170-year-old company, and really help to transform their strategy around community giving and corporate sustainability and ESG was incredible. And I jumped at the opportunity, and here I am, an outsider and with a very non-traditional background, but loving it so far.
Great. Thank you, Madge. And before we get to Bidjan, can you also, for our audience, share a fun fact about yourself as we get to learn a little bit more about you today?
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, I already told you I was from Australia. That might not be super fun. I mentioned this to Wester and Bidjan, and it went down well, so I'm going to repeat it. But when I was pregnant with my son several years ago, I happened to be in Malawi with none other than Rihanna, and she enlisted me in a soccer game with a group of very rambunctious teenage girls at the time, and so I did have some hairy moments, but definitely kept me active, and I couldn't really say no. So it's my claim to fame.
That is so awesome. Thank you for sharing. And Bijan, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Thank you for having me. And I see three people who are or have been fighting for children and their rights. I spent the last decade working with Save the Children, so a close partner of UNICEF. And before that, worked for the World Bank on development impact and was part of the team that started Teach for America in Germany. So the thread, I think, goes back to really identifying people's potential and assets and removing the barriers. And that's why I'm so excited about the work we do at Atlas Corps, especially now in this time. And we'll get to that later on. Oh, you want a fun fact too?
Fun fact.
Well, I grew up in West Berlin with lots of soldiers and the Berlin Wall around us. And when I turned 10, I had the huge opportunity to actually take down that wall myself, not alone, but I spent a lot of time during those months with a hammer in my hands, as you can imagine a 10-year-old boy would enjoy a lot.
That is a great fun fact. So we're going to get into a little bit more discussion about your leadership. I am a new CEO, as you all know. I started at the end of January, and many folks have been transitioning work and starting new roles. And so I want you all to think back sort of on your first day of the job. And Madge, if you're ready, think about like you're ready to assume your role, right, as the president of the American Express Foundation. You've had breakfast. You take your long commute from one cushion of your couch to the next cushion of your couch where your computer set up and in your virtual office. And so what's next? How did you prepare yourself for your first day? We'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, I live in Brooklyn in New York, so it truly was about 5 steps, both from my bed and my couch to my desk where I am now, where I still am. And I can safely say that when I envisioned starting in this role, I didn't necessarily picture what it would look like doing it from my living room on day one. That does create a set of unique challenges. And I think we can all relate to the fact that in a virtual environment, which I think it's now been almost 2.5 years of, you do have to work extra hard, especially as a new leader, to get to know people, to spend time together, to build a team, to learn what folks' interests and aspirations are, and frankly, to understand the culture of the organization that you're joining. Some of that doesn't always come through over a screen. And so my first few months, I would say, became a little bit of a listening and learning tour. A lot of active listening, and I know we're going to talk about that shortly, but I was really trying to absorb as much as I could from this, 13-inch screen in front of me, from all of those around me. And I did have my predecessor still in the role for part of that time, for the first 3 months. So that helped me to some extent understand how our team was structured, why we were focused on certain things, some of our processes. But I think the virtual environment also allowed me to meet more people than I probably could have in the office. There was a lot of coffee chats and lots of back-to-backs in those first few months. But they were all people who interacted with my role, and I was able to also get to know my team and form my own thoughts in addition to having that time with my predecessor. And I have to say, that was incredibly helpful to form my sort of first 90 days impression of where we were, where we could go, what our strengths were, and the culture of the organization I joined and who my key collaborators would be. And then I started going into the office a few months in, and that also helped me get a feel for Amex and the culture. And it has a great culture, but it was really daunting stepping in, as I mentioned, to a 170-year-old company with this role. Has such a cherished history of giving via the foundation. And I knew that part of my role was going to be to evolve and change certain things. So I wanted to make sure I really understood that challenge. I really understood the company I was entering and how I could help take that to the next level with the amazing team and collaborators I had. So that listening tour, getting a picture of what was around me and bringing some of my own opinions to that, as well as mixing virtual and in office, really helped.
Yeah, that's great. And Bidjan, what about you?
So specifically on the first day, I was nervous. It was my first CEO day as in this role. And as a CEO, I hadn't been a CEO before. And I had this virtual challenge, as Madge mentioned, right? It just makes a difference how you meet people and how do I connect, right? How do I connect with who I am and who I want to be? I look back at the calendar. I had 7 meetings on my first day, and I started the listening tour. And those meetings were mostly one-on-ones where I really started my 5 questions to everyone, starting with the staff. And I guess looking back, I kept meditating on the growth starts outside your comfort zone mantra, and really trying to calm down with the impatience and with a lot of the anticipation that you bring. And what really helped was 2 things. First, I did pickup at the end of the day. So that calms you down because you're needed in different ways from that moment on. And secondly, we actually had a team dinner on day 2 where we could meet in person, share some experience, get to know each other over dinner. So that really helped me on day 1 and day 2.
Yeah, that's really really helpful sharing, and both of you talked about this concept of the listening tour. So, quick anecdote for those of you watching: I had an opportunity to connect with Bidjan, who shared this concept with me, and so I want you, Bidjan, to talk a little bit about this. So, one of the themes of this year's summit, along with Lead and Flourish, is listening, and when you joined Atlas Core, you assumed 2 roles. You were starting as the CEO, but you also took on the moniker of CLO, which is Chief Listening Officer, which I have proudly borrowed throughout my journey. And I'd love for you to share more about this because it was so impactful for me. And so what was your inspiration, I think, behind the approach, and how have you, more specifically, how have you utilized this listening in these months that you've come to the organization, and how has it affected your integration into the organization?
Wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity. Actually, I want to give a shout out to my coach, Geraldine. I appreciate you. She's worked with me for 4 years, and the last role in Save the Children at the global level was very intense during the pandemic and the response. And it also led me to thinking about what I want to do next. And one of the things we did together was take lessons on what I want to change as a leader. And one of those things was I want to be a better listener, and I want to use that to create connections, even if it's virtual, and really understand what is core to the organization that I'm stepping into, the myths, the stories, what people really perceive and project onto this organization that has a really strong community and a strong staff. So one of the things, and I think it's one of the best things I've done so far, is really giving everyone the opportunity to talk to me for 15 minutes and setting that up through a link every week. And I've actually continued that since. I initially had 90 days, and I've talked to a lot of CEOs and other leaders, and they said, the first thing, the most important thing is resist the urge to make decisions for as long as you can afford it. And this is really, really hard, and I'm sure I see Madge nodding, but really the idea of not trying to act and really understanding what you are placed into is really core. I want to share one more anecdote because it blew me away. And you get so many different stories. There was a Russian alumni, and this was before the war started, who I spoke with. And she showed up on the screen and she said, you could almost see her disbelief you're here. You're really talking to me. And in my country, no one at your level would even pick up the phone to call me. And you forget, right? For us, it's how we want to show up. For many other cultures and organizations, it's very, very foreign. And it's something that helps you project who you want to be as a leader, but also transmit a culture, an approach on leadership that I think we need a lot more of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that's really profound. And I think, Madge, if you can build on that a little bit. And so, from your vantage, I know you talked about a little bit, but I want to hear some more in terms of how has listening been a technique for your transition? And, I think we all kind of know that listening is important, but I do feel like it's underrated in terms of the level of importance and how essential it is to leadership. And so can you share some, Bidjan actually just shared using listening to create connections, right? And so it's really, really powerful. So can you share some of your initial perspectives?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly powerful, and I'm going to borrow it too, Bidjan. So this is going to go viral. No, I think listening is fundamental to leadership in so many ways, especially as a new leader. And as I shared, that first few months was really an important time for me in terms of listening, understanding the diversity of opinions and the expectations as well of me as a leader and my role, as well as people's individual aspirations, which I think came out in those conversations. And I think in a company as big as American Express, I mean, we have almost 64,000 colleagues around the world and in a range of different markets. It was a really great way to get to know and step outside of what was sometimes my day-to-day to understand the different functions of the business, because it's easy to get mired in the CSR world and think just about the impact, but understanding the business was really important. And then I think the conversations both of people above your level but also below is so important, because as Bidjan says, I think that idea of servant leadership is so critical when you're understanding the aspirations of those around you and really trying to be a leader across the organization. And some people have the most incredible ideas that they don't get to share. And, you benefit as a leader when you truly listen to everyone. So, I think that's one of the first reasons is that it's important to hear that diversity in those different point of views. That's ultimately going to help you. And then the other reason is I needed it, certainly, and to Bidjan's point about not acting too quickly, to define my vision. I couldn't have done that without listening and taking input from those around me and to make what I'd initially thought about better before I started to act. So that was critical. And I think active listening, also asking questions and then listening carefully to the answers is just as important, because sometimes you find areas to probe when you truly listen that offer new opportunities and take the conversation in another direction. And it's important also to hear and to listen to, and this sounds a bit, airy-fairy, but what's between the words. People's body language tells you a lot. And sometimes being in person really makes that easier, but you can do it over the virtual mediums too. So, I think it's so important to holistically listen. And in a more day-to-day sense, I think that one good thing to come out of the pandemic from a work perspective is the more level playing field that being virtual offers, because everyone can share equal real estate, equal time to share their ideas, can be listened to. And with return to office now happening, the key is not to take a step back from that, to continue to hear all the voices in a meeting, not just those in the physical room. And I think it's really critical to listen to all of your people.
Yeah, you talked about servant leadership and active listening. I mean, it's a really, really important piece. I mean, everyone hears, but listening is really a skill. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the words that come up that are sort of synonymous with the last 2 years. Right before, I said we're here in DC, so right before starting this, we did a word wall, and we all shared some of our reflections. If you were to sum up what the last 2 years have been in one word, and some of the words that came up: change, transition, pivot, and to sort of encapsulate those times. I also understand that both of your teams have experienced significant transition during these years. And I think it's fair to say that the great migration of the workforce is affecting us all. And so, Madge, what leadership skills have you used to create certainty during this key organizational transitional period of transitional time?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to be sort of grounded in your own values as an individual. And, you know, our CEO talks about this, Steve Squarey, he talks about this often. He says that tough situations don't build character, they reveal character. And I think that's so important, because I think sticking to your core values is something that we believe as a company. It's something that has always been a part of my DNA. And I don't think the circumstances around you should ever change what you truly believe as a North Star. And for me, you know, that's making a positive impact on people's lives. So that will always help me. And I think that for American Express, this is true as well. Find direction and act with purpose and impact, no matter what's going on around me. But I also truly believe, in terms of kind of that idea of transition and pivot and change, that success in those environments follows strategy and structure. So when everything is chaotic around you, I think it's really important to have a strategy and structure. And as Bidjan said earlier, not to just necessarily jump in and act, but to build that first. So while my poor team probably felt it was an insane time, and you know, my first 3 months I asked so many questions. My first 6 months I did too. That time was about building a new strategy, and that included a pivot from our existing priorities, but needed to align with our forward vision. And then I had to make some structural changes to roles based on capabilities that took me time to understand, to give ownership to those across the team as well. And that, I have to say, isn't a solo task. So I think the other thing in times of change is not to isolate yourself. No man is an island, and it was important to have a team to co-create that strategy and buy into it. And we evolved it so many times before we got it right. So I think pivot is such a critical word to it, because you have to be prepared to pivot. You have to be prepared not to get it right. And you have to know when to admit that you don't know the answer, that something isn't working, or that you were wrong. So I think, you know, changing your mind based on new data or on new facts, it isn't a weakness, it's a sign of strength. And none of us in this environment can predict what's coming next. I think we all thought, you know, the worst of things was over, and every day there's a new global event that teaches us that's not the case. So I think it's a sign of strength that you have the confidence in your team, confidence in the evidence base, and your own instincts to change, to grow, and to pivot. And I'm just glad that I had a team that was flexible and adaptable and went with the flow. And I think a year on, when we reflect back on what we accomplished, we see that the changes to our strategy were successful, and the outcomes that they've created were impactful. And I will say, you know, change doesn't work for everyone, and the great migration is real. So, you know, we have lost people in the course of this, and the opportunity is there to also bring in new thinking and new perspective. And so with new team members, that's a great opportunity, but it's also important to ground those members first in the culture, to get them to understand what you're trying to accomplish with your strategy and how they fit in. And I'm not going to lie, it's hard hiring in this environment. So I'm lucky to have an agile team in the meantime that can do 3 or 4 roles while we staff up. So prioritization is very key in that, and our strategy helps with that too.
Yeah, I really like the success follow strategy and structure. So Bidjan and I talked about having a shirt line. Bidjan says, with some of his anecdotes. So we're gonna bring you in the fold, Madge. Some really good.
I love it.
Yeah, pearls of wisdom here. And so, Bidjan, what keeps your team motivated and committed to achieving the mission? If you could share some.
Yes, Madge, there's so much that resonates. And I maybe for a few seconds, I really want to highlight the team and the context, because you mentioned change and pivoting. You've had an organization that is 15 years old, where the founder left after 15 years. He remains on the board, but he left into a huge government role. So he doesn't have that much time. And we spend a lot of it talking about it, but he was in a huge role. So that was a big change for the organization. You had half the team transitioning, and it's a small organization. So you have some staff who have been there for a long time, and half of the staff who are new to the organization, which creates a dynamic as well in terms of finding your culture, finding your core. And then you had a fundamental change to our business model of bringing people together in person. And to all of this, and kudos to the team, they responded, including, you know, changing to hybrid and bringing people together, regardless of whether it's on the screen or in person. And so I think through the listening, the one thing that I realized is what keeps people going is creating human connection. So that moment when you see, when you watch, observe people's faces on your team, when people from all over the globe show up on the screen and really, really honing in on that, this is why they're here. This is what gets them going, and making sure those interactions happen on a continuous basis and they get a chance to contribute to them. And the second thing I want to say is, and contradict myself a little bit on the listening tour, one of the things that I really wanted to change, and one of the lessons from previous leadership roles, I wanted to trust my gut more on decisions and make them quickly. And I made one big decision quickly, a staffing decision, and I know, and I knew that it was the right decision. And my 360, 6 months later, actually told me it was, and staff really appreciated creating clarity really early on some of the structures that I felt do not work, paid off eventually. It doesn't keep me from listening, but there are some things that I changed really quickly, and I think I would do that over again, because you just have to start trusting your gut on some decisions.
Yeah, and it sounds like if the 360 was reflective of that being a positive change, what it sounds to me is that your listening informed your decision making, which then had a positive desired result. So maybe you weren't contradicting your listening after all. And this question is for either of you. So forward together is sort of the key theme of the summit. What do you think, why do you think it is important for us within the social sector to move forward together, especially as we're figuring out what our new normal is going to be, you know, and battling the uncertainty of this pandemic that seems to continue to be dragging on? How do you think leaders should approach this idea of forward together? So either of you.
Bidjan, do you want to go first on this one? I feel like I've pipped you otherwise.
So how much time do we have? I think this is fascinating, and I really hope to hear what the summit and the participants discuss. But I thought of Marshall Gans first, right? Self, us, and now. Mm. And what it makes me think about is to start with forward. We need to develop a positive vision for the future. And I think it's already here. And this is why I'm so excited about Atlas Score, because the pandemic, with all that it's brought, has also brought the opportunity to level the playing field for talent. So one of our core founding missions is, and beliefs is, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And I believe opportunity now is there. We can create it. We have 2 years of experience that talent can work from anywhere, from most of the knowledge economy. So that's a huge positive story that I would put forward for us to be engaged in now. And the second, together, to me, it reminds me of my other nonprofit career. And sometimes when you think you're a big organization, and then you realize, you know, 2 billion budget is not big. It's minuscule if you don't leverage and do it together. And especially in the nonprofit sector, sometimes the notion that, oh, you don't need the private sector, oh, you don't really need government. We really need to get rid of any of those notions right away, because that is what I mean with together. If we don't leverage together and think about scale, and not scale of size, but scale of impact, that's how forward together come together for me, with a story and with the approach of leveraging.
I completely agree with that. And I would pull on the budget thread for a minute, because also having been in the nonprofit sector, I think, and I understand where this comes in sometimes, but there is so much competition for resources for those in the social sector. And I think sometimes that leads to sector silos and everyone competing for their key moment of the year and you know, their replenishment and their resourcing. And I think it's so important to realize that the challenges that we're all facing now are too big and too interconnected for any one organization or sector to deal with them alone. So I think from a social sector perspective, that idea of moving forward together and really thinking about intersectionality and interconnectivity and strengths and of different organizations and coming together is key, because I think none of us can go it alone, and we rely on each other to be successful. And then the other part of it, which Bidjan touched on, is I think it's so important to think of that holistically outside of the social sector as well, because I think the idea of collaboration and joint solutions, not zero-sum games, is so critical right now, because there are better, smarter, more efficient ways of doing things. No one has cracked the nut on the perfect silver bullet or solution. And so I think you need all the sectors at the table. You need government, you need private sector, you need social sectors to come together and to be truly open to collaboration and partnership, as well as resource sharing, frankly. And so I think one of the things we've been exploring a lot more at American Express is some public-private, nonprofit collaborative relationships. One is the C40 announcement we made the other day, where we're working with the mayoral offices of New York and London, as well as the C40 nonprofit, which works with the Global Coalition of Mayors on climate solutions and mapping consumption-based inventory in cities, because not one of those groups firstly held all the data, not one had the full resources to do it, and then the technical expertise sat in different realms too. So I think, you bring certain skills to the table in whatever role you're in, and working together to plug the gaps and make the final outcome stronger than it would otherwise have been. Each one of us is greater than the sum of our parts. So I think that's critical when we think about moving forward together.
Yeah, that's on that thread of each one of us is greater than the sum of our parts. The phrase "forward together," it feels external. So I wanted to get a sense from you all. How does this show up for you internally within your respective organizations, within your teams? Are there some practical tips or some stories that you can share in terms of how this concept of forward together shows up for each of you?
Sure. I can go first if you like.
Yeah, if you can pick it up, that'd be great.
Sure. So in terms of my team, and again, being a new leader, it's part of my journey for the last, year has been actually building a team vision. So now I think we're at the stage of kind of moving on it. But I am committed as part of that to being transparent and open sharing across the team. We bring the group together as a group often to talk about the projects we're all working on, the challenges we're facing, the ideas that we have, because I think traditionally this team had actually been siloed. And I mentioned I sort of wear two hats in my role. I oversee ESG, the environmental social governance strategy and implementation for the business, and then also community giving. And so our team was sort of a little bit siloed across those two areas. And what I'm finding with these open conversations where everyone can input on problem solving is that there is a lot more constructive kind of solutions and thinking than people would have otherwise had in those areas. The second thing I'll say is our three priorities, so promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, building financial confidence, and advancing climate solutions, for the ESG side sound very different. And we've now translated them into, grant-making priorities for the foundation. But there is so much interconnectedness between the three. When we talk about in our community giving, creating opportunities through education and workforce development for underrepresented communities, the idea of green jobs is so woven into that, and the green economy and future. So the ability to be flexible with our thinking and to really think as a one team mentality has been really important to broker certain partnerships that we have now that don't neatly fit into anyone's particular box, but where you have team members coming together to work on joint outcomes around them. So I think that is one of the ways we're practicing it. I won't say we've gotten it perfect, but I think that is something we'll see the fruits of going forward.
That's great. And Bidjan?
Yes, I want to build on something, Madge, you mentioned earlier about leadership showing in crisis. To me, and this is the February 24 moment, right, when the outbreak of the war started, community shows in crisis, and you build community and you strengthen community in times of crisis. So I was so impressed to see our Russian alumni showing up and writing a letter of solidarity across the country, putting their names under it, putting themselves in danger. We had to remove those afterwards, after the law came in a few days later. And creating that space in that moment for a global community to support each other, from Palestine, from Ethiopia, from Indonesia. So places that have been hit by conflict as well. And people saying, no, this is not about my conflict. This is about me showing up to support you as a mental health professional, as someone who's experienced this, as someone who can lend an ear and listen, as someone who wants to go fundraise. So to me, it's those moments in which you say, this is where Forward Together really comes to play. In difficult moments, bringing a community together, creating the space, supporting each other. And that's where I think we can play a really important role now and going forward.
Yeah, thank you. You both are deeply intentional and really thoughtful about how you approach your work, your space, and your leadership. We learned some fun anecdotes this morning earlier. Madge turning up with Rihanna and Bidjan knocking down the Berlin Wall. One more personal anecdote as we go. And so as we transition rather to the next portion, which will be taking questions that have been coming in throughout our chat. Just from each of you, sort of what is your personal sort of motivation, like that excites you about the work, that gets you out of bed, that keeps you up, keeps the creative thoughts flowing? What are those things that really connect for each of you? So Bidjan, if you could start us off.
Yes, and interestingly, Wesner, it connects to the listening tour, because what I was trying to do in the first weeks was understand the metaphor, the picture that is in my head when I think about Atlas Core. And after a few weeks, all of a sudden, talking to young people, this is the potential. It's their talent, the potential that is not yet tapped. And then I thought about this iceberg where, you see what's above the water, but there is much more beneath the water. And just focusing on that, it's a metaphor, right? But it really gets me going in terms of, we have not even tapped into a small percentage of the potential of young people that is out there. And it's all possible now as the pandemic is coming to an end, hopefully, right? So that really gets me motivated and excited like it hasn't had in many years.
Yeah, that's great. And that harkens back to your piece where you shared talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. We are no longer in that space. Opportunity now is everywhere. So that's really great. And Madge, what about you?
I mean, I love that no 2 days are the same, other than when I have to keep making that 5-step walk over here when I'm not in the office. But I love that, every day my team gets to work with an incredible range of partners, many of those here, across a wide variety of sectors, of disciplines. And what I love is in that we share a common purpose and common goals to really make improvements to the communities we serve. So coming back to that personal North Star, I see impact in what I do every day. And that's very personally motivating and fulfilling, because we are all in this together, but, we have to have that personal fulfillment too, to make sure that we're there for the right reasons. And I will say, sometimes in this environment, you feel like a firefighter as a leader as well. There's always something new that crops up, but that's also part of the excitement. And sometimes, and I love this, but it also takes making hard decisions. And as a leader, you have to be the one sometimes to voice that, to get others on board. But I think that's an interesting part of the journey as well, to navigate that personally and professionally for your organization. So I would say that's another part of the role that I relish and that keeps me going. And then finally, just my team. They're incredible, and they're driven and passionate and spurred on by the work we do. And I'm just so privileged to work with all of them.
That's great. I feel enlightened for all that you shared this morning. We have some questions for folks that were joining us. And so this one is for Madge. Genevieve from Michigan asks, I work in the nonprofit environmental sector and believe strongly in cross-sector collaboration under the sustainability umbrella. What does ESG mean to you? How would you describe its connection to CSR? And most importantly, what would be your recommendation for nonprofit sector to work together with corporate sector for maximizing mutually beneficial impact?
Well, I think I talked a little bit about the last part of the question before. I think that's part of that forward together and you know, being greater than the, you know, our sum of our parts being greater than the individual. So I think that's why it's important for everyone to come together. But on ESG, you know, it's a great question because I think ESG has cropped up in the last 10 years. A lot of consultants are making a lot of money from it, but it's not that well understood. And I think what it really is an evolution of the CSR space that started out. You know, it started out with pure philanthropy, certainly for American Express's history, pure philanthropy, some community volunteerism. And then over the last 10 years, it's become even more important for a company to be transparent and accountable about the decisions and their data and their disclosures. And I think ESG is a framework for presenting and reporting on a company's responsibility and success across key areas like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think the increase in visibility of the climate movement and the importance of companies to environmental outcomes has meant that the E part of ESG, so environment, social governance, is getting even more intricate these days and is requiring a lot more transparency from companies about how their business and their operations impact the environment. And I think that is new. That is something that I think wasn't as present in the corporate social responsibility space previously. But then to your question about how the two interact, I don't think CSR has gone away. I think it has evolved. And interestingly, we've renamed our CSR team, which I lead, Corporate Sustainability, to really acknowledge the mix of you know, sustainability and corporate responsibility and values. And as I mentioned, we oversee ESG and community giving, which I see as the traditional part of CSR. So in terms of how we've approached it, certainly to connect those two things, our ESG strategy we view as touching all the key stakeholders that our business interacts with, our colleagues, our customers, our shareholders, and our communities. And then our community giving component, or the traditional CSR part of that, is really the communities aspect of it. So it's how we make impact in the communities where we live, work, and operate through our philanthropic giving. And so that's how we're at least thinking about the interconnection. And what we've done is translated, as I mentioned, the 3 ESG pillars in our strategy: diversity, equity, and inclusion, financial confidence, and climate for us, into community giving goals. So we also mirror what we're doing in communities against what we've set as business priorities. Hopefully that helps.
Very detailed, and thanks for that question. And the next one is for Bidjan. So it started out with Kim from Washington, D.C., and then apparently everyone wants to know the 5 questions that you asked. You referenced the 5 questions that you asked staff on the first day and beyond, so that you ground your moments when you were having one-on-one listening to us.
Yes.
So folks want to know.
Hi, Kim and everyone. The first one was, who are you and what's your story? The second one was, what is great about Atlas Corps? The third one was, what is the biggest challenge? The fourth one was, what would you do if you were in my role? By the way, it's the best one. And the most important one is the last one, how can I help?
That is great. I am taking copious notes as well. That's fantastic.
Well, I can paste them into the chat or somewhere.
That'd be great. Yeah, I was going to ask. I wonder if you could share them in the chat. So the next one is for Madge. And this is just, again, a number of folks wanting to both welcome you to the new role and also as alumni of the American Express Leadership Academy community. Please share with us your plans for getting to know and listening to this alumni network.
Well, I think one of the ways is definitely the summit and bringing you all together and hearing kind of your perspectives on the last couple of years, because we haven't been together and want to know and reflect on the journey of the Alumni Network. The second, if you're not already on it, is we have a really great LinkedIn group. Which I think one of the opportunities for us is to engage more with that group and get insights and feedback from that collection of leaders that we've built over so many years. And so you'll see some, polls and thoughts about, as we're, reimagining and thinking about what comes next for the American Express Leadership Academy, to get your thoughts and your input on what's worked. Some of those questions Bidjan asked, we might start imposing in there, but what worked and what didn't, and what would you like to see? And as we think about our evolution, we want to take those views into consideration. So we're going to use all the mediums that we have to continue the communication. And then the second thing I will say is be patient with us, because we're also in the process of recruiting for roles that will directly be able to interact and think about our Leadership Academy going forward. So I don't have all the answers, but we will continue to, focus on and engage with the Alumni Network.
Okay, so our takeaway here is stay tuned and stay plugged in, alumni.
Exactly.
This just in, Atlas Core blog post next week featuring Bidjan's 5 questions on his CEO listening tour. So you don't want to miss that blog post. That's a gratuitous plug for the Atlas Core.
Thank you for the weekend work.
Yes. So this next question is also, again, for you, Madge. So Allison from Michigan asks, please share more about how you have made sure to give equal voice / listening to virtual employees, not just the ones in the office. She shares that I struggle with this, as I can run into some people and those people end up with more face time, sort of in an organic way. Like, I think this concept of the water cooler talk, right? So Allison from Michigan wants to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Alison, it's a great question. And what I would say is the first thing is not to feel guilty about those water cooler conversations, because I think they're so important, as well as we're going back to the hybrid environment, to resume that feel of being, together in the office and really remembering and relishing those personal connections that you can form. So I would say don't feel bad about that, and don't shortchange the time that you have with people in person. But there's an equal way to form those relationships, I think, with those virtually. And so in my team, one of the things I do is I make sure that I have one-to-ones with all my direct reports, and then skip levels with those that aren't my direct reports, so that we have that regular interaction. We do coffee talks where people can sign up for sort of, hours in time with me, similar to what Bidjan was sharing before. So you can form that connection with people that you wouldn't ordinarily either run into or that are fully virtual. And I think it's really important to give time to virtual employees, because you don't know why people are virtual. You don't know what's going on in people's virtual environments as well. And sometimes it's a very isolating thing. I mean, I'm at home right now, not in the office as I usually would be, because I tested positive for COVID on Monday, So, even I am not getting the interactions that I normally would in the office. And what I'm finding is it's harder when you're the only person on a virtual screen in meetings. So think about things like making sure that those people speak first when you have a question or a dialogue in your hybrid meetings, making sure that your technology is even up to date, so people on a virtual screen can see who the speaker is, and can hear and sense the nuance in the room, making sure that you prioritize maybe questions or raised hand functions on virtual tools, so that people don't feel like they're shortchanged from contributing to a conversation. And then make time for those more personal conversations outside of your water cooler moments and your skip levels and etc. Make time for the coffee chats if you can.
Thank you, Madge, and sending you all the positive energy that we have. And absolutely, this is a show that you're committed to what we're doing, that you're here today. So a special thank you for that. So Lionel asks, what role does organizational risk management and risk mitigation play in your approach to being a leader? Either of you could take this one.
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, sure.
I'm in love with matrices. So a good matrix makes me happy. And one of the things that we started doing is an organizational risk matrix, because I was really underwhelmed by a lot of risk approaches that I've seen in the sector. And usually they focus mostly on financial. And that is not the only risk to an organization. And doing that together as a team and then visualizing on a matrix up to a 9-point scale, what are the ones that are urgent? So the ones that are really likely to happen and the impact they will have, and mapping that out can really help you have an informed discussion with your board as well. So so far so good. I didn't need to use them with the board in a way that I wouldn't want to, but it's really helpful, transparent information. What is the team and the organization and the CEO think about the most important risks, right? And if something happens, you can go back to that and say, why did you have that at scale number 9 when it actually should have been at number 1 and another thing happened? So it creates openness and transparency about risk, and it's an organizational approach.
That's great. I want to also be mindful of time. And so also, Bidjan, it seems like you've given yourself some more homework on this matrix, because now I want to know which one you use. So maybe add it to the blog post for the 5 questions. So Andy from Florida asked, and I think we'll have time for one more question after this one from Andy. To both of you, how do you create buy-in with your team around the one team concept / vision? So how do you work through sort of resistance, I guess? It seems like Andy may be looking for some feedback there.
I'm happy to kick off on that one if it helps, Andy. Look, again, I would say strategy and structure. I think if people know what the vision is, that's the first step, because I think otherwise you're not going to get to have anyone understand or build that consensus around it. And the second thing is, I don't think you can force anyone to a vision. So it's about understanding your people, understanding what motivates individuals, understanding what their day-to-day looks like, and then connecting them and their role to the overall vision in a way that they can really buy into it. And so I think that part is really important. It's understanding your people and having the structure that supports the vision, making the vision very clear. And then thirdly, it's making sure that they were part of creating the vision as well. I think that is one of the biggest challenges as a leader, because we have these great ideas and we could run it at 1,000,000 miles an hour and you know, do it all and tell everyone to do what we need to do. But a key part of servant leadership is making sure that you get the input also from the people that are going to be executing, frankly, at the end of the day. And so if you don't have people involved with actually creating the vision in the first place, and then you don't connect it to what they're doing on a day-to-day, you're never going to win that one team mentality. That's my take.
That's really helpful. Now, I know the question was for both of you, but I want to get, there's 2 more, and I want to get them in.
I agree with Madge.
Okay, I was going to say, Bidjan, are you co-signing? Great. I love that you continue to revisit the theme of servant leadership. It's really taken very clear form throughout our discussion today. That's been super helpful. So we have a question from someone on our YouTube page and also from Facebook. So I think we are going to go with our YouTube question, and we'll see how quickly we can get through it, and we may be able to take the Facebook one. So Eduardo asks from YouTube, could you share an example of leading through listening that you learned from peers and other cultures that maybe surprised you and informed your leadership style?
Bidjan, do you want to take this one?
This is a great question. And you know, it reminds me how much I miss traveling and being out there and meeting people. I mean, one of the reasons I joined Atlascore is because of all the countries and talented young people I've met before and just the belief in them. So actually, let me take it a little bit differently. It reminds me of this Rumi quote, which is what it reminded me of when talking to people is not something specific about one culture, but actually that everyone has been made for some particular work. And the desire for that work has been put in every heart. And to me, that I see everywhere, regardless of different cultures. So maybe not the exact answer, but something that really has been strengthened as a belief, meeting people from everywhere.
That's great. And so we're going to squeeze this last one in, and it'll be for you, Madge. Julia from Brazil, who's in our Facebook audience, asked, what is the best way to approach the private sector from your unique perspective on the private side and the nonprofit side?
Yeah, Julia, I think the first thing is to understand that not every company is the same, and understand what the priorities and focuses are of a company before you even approach them. Because sometimes, even though you're doing incredible work, if it's not aligned to what the company is doing, it may not be the best fit for you. And there may be another company that you know, a private sector entity that you should engage with. So I think that's first, is understand that the private sector is as unique as the work that you do. So understand their mission. The second thing I would say is not to just see the private sector as a cash cow. I think, you know, to be frank, I think, you know, we've traditionally been seen as a resourcing arm, and that's great. But as the head of a foundation, I know that our resources are limited too. What we do have is the opportunity as a business, and with our full scale of our audience and our reach and our colleague base and our global footprint, to do more sometimes than write a check, to be a partner on data, on systemic change, on operations in particular cities that extend beyond our potentially our funding arm. So I would think about the full range of tools that a private sector company has at its disposal, to approach them as a partner versus sort of cold outreach for fundraising.
Thanks for that. And in our remaining 3 minutes we have here, so I know you both have elevator speeches like ready to go. So I would say 1 minute or less, if you could each share sort of a tangible recommendation or an action item that folks can take away with you know, just another pearl of wisdom. So Madge, take it away, and then Bidjan, if you could close this out.
Okay, I'm going to mirror what our approach is now to community giving, which is, I think for everyone, no matter what organization you're from, try and do in this environment fewer, bigger, better things that have global impact and that are really core to your values. So anything that you're going to do, try prioritize and do fewer, bigger, better.
That's great. Bidjan.
I agree with Madge's, and I will add another quote. A desk is a dangerous place from which to view the world. Get out there, meet people, regardless whether virtual or in person, and form your opinions and your passions and move forward.
That's great. This has been an incredible talk with both of you. Be on the lookout, everyone, for our t-shirt series, Bidjan and Madge Says, with beautiful quotes. There's so many today. Thank you for making us laugh, for causing us to think more deeply as leaders. Thank you for your time. There's so much, I think, that we can learn from our leadership that is informed by our listening and really by you all engaging us today. And I want to say, from a personal standpoint, you know, my being here sort of 7 years in the making, having started Amex in 2015, and this Alumni Network has been so impactful to me and so many others. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't say how transformative it has been in my life personally and the lives of other alumni. So we are really grateful to each of you and for supporting this necessary and continued initiative. So we also want to thank everyone for joining us and for your insightful questions. They were really incredible. We especially thank, obviously, the American Express for your support of the conversations. Again, Madge, for showing up and you know, sending you positive vibes that you're on the mend quickly, and for your support of our conversations and for this entire summit. And so I just want to send a note for folks that are with us that joining us again tomorrow at 10 a.m. For our final discussion. And I've invited the alumni and attendees who are attending the full summit to take a quick break and then return in 10 minutes for our next workshop. So please consult your schedule for more details. we leave you with this special video from Leader Stories that highlights one of the dynamic members of our alumni community.
From my childhood, I had known that my life is going to be spent in a meaningful way. My parents educated me to live a life which is dedicated to the social causes and to the empowerment of the communities. Gravis works for integrated development of rural communities in the Thar Desert of India. In 2005, my father unexpectedly passed away. It was a big shock for me, for my family, for the entire Gravis organization. Filling in his shoes, the leadership role that he used to play was extremely challenging, and I chose to be an active part of the Gravis family, leaving a full-time medical career aside. Community leadership is extremely important to us. Everything that we do has to be done in direct participation of the communities. Over the years, Gravis has played a very significant role in forming, training, building the capacities of more than 3,500 community-based organizations. Setting up the first ever rural hospital in this area was a significant milestone of my life. Receiving American Express Alumni Award last year was also a very significant achievement of my life as well as of Gravis, the organization. My definition of a leader is someone who builds collective action, who listens to their colleagues, who listens to the communities, and takes steps for solidarity and for collective development.